I now give the floor to Her Excellency Gireraman Mukemba Obono, Minister of Culture and Tourism of Equatorial Guinea.
Excelentísimo señor Sam Kutesa.
Excellence Sam Kutesa, President of the General Assembly. Excellency Ms. Valerie Amos, Undersecretary General, representing His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Excellency Mr. Ivan Simonovich, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. Madame Mireille Fanon Mendez-France, Chairperson of the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. Excellency Mr. Mohamed Ziad Douale, Chairman of the Intergovernmental Working Group on the effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. Dr. Barry Biekenman, Representative of Civil Society. Sir Hilary Begles MacDonald, Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and on behalf of its President, His Excellency Mr. Obiang Ngozo, it is for me a great honor to take the floor in this hall of the General Assembly of the United Nations on the occasion of the launching of the International Decade for People of African Descent. Mr. President, it was almost a year ago in this August Assembly that the Family of Nations decided to establish the International Decade for People of African Descent from 2015 to 2024. For member states who sought to give more consideration, more justice, and better conditions for their development and the full achievement of their aspirations for the sons, grandsons, daughters, and great-grandchildren of Africa who had been shipped to the Americas and to other continents throughout the travails of history and the slave trade. The fact remains that to this day, people of African descent continue to suffer injustice and shameful treatment that should have been long ago thrown into the dustbin of history. Intolerance, racism, disposition, and vexations of all kinds. However, these ills and suffering were never able to extinguish the flame that burns in the heart of the peoples of African descent. Despite everything, this diaspora has continued to create, to contribute to, enrich, and provide for the development of their new countries with their talents, their grace, their skills, their knowledge, and their artistic heritage. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the event that we have just attended at noon today in the context of the project of permanent memorial to honor the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade is a perfect example of this. This indeed shows a great victory for temerity over weakness. It was good to hear the sound of drums coming from the heart of Africa. It was sublime to hear the notes coming from the strings of the kora. It was exquisite to witness the very technical mastery of a single whose voice reminded us of the suffering that so many mothers harbored silently during the centuries of transatlantic middle passages during the long nights of the slave trade. But the victory is also that of a young woman from Dominica who was not only an excellent in her interpretation of music that hails from the darkest bowels of traffic investors, she was also excellent and sublime in her rendition of operas from old Europe, thus proving the lie of those who wanted to relegate the descendants of the first of all continents to the rank of accompanying spectators of other peoples, as it was alleged that they merely walked alongside but not on board as a train of humanity moves forward. It is precisely for this reason that the 2001 World Conference in Durban against racism, racist discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance was a landmark, because it was necessary to hold that debate and recognize the serious consequences that befell the people of African ancestry over the past centuries, precisely because of slavery, the slave trade, and colonialism. Almost 14 years after the adoption of the Declaration and Program of Action of Durban, people of African descent continue to face discrimination and harassment still. Faced with these realities of racism and structural and institutional discrimination in everyday life, the international community cannot remain inert, much less silent. The promotion and protection of the human rights of people of African descent should become a priority for the family of nations. Resolution 68/237 of the 23rd of December 2013, proclaiming the International Decade, which we are launching today, aims to promote tolerance, protection, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons of African descent, as recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Member states must also ensure that the important contribution made by people of African descent to universal culture in the world economy, science, and the arts is adequately acknowledged. Distinguished President, ladies and gentlemen, as Equatorial Guinea showed earlier today by joining with other countries in contributing financially to the Permanent Memorial Project, our country, inspired by the enlightened vision of its head of state, His Excellency President Omambiakhambakso, will continue to partner with all people of goodwill. People without history are people with no future. Without recognition, their children will see their dreams jeopardized. The transatlantic slave trade has left deep scars. Healing the pain can be achieved through education, culture, and science. This is what explains the importance given to the UNESCO Equatorial Guinea Prize for Life Sciences under the initiative of His Excellency President of Equatorial Guinea, as approved by UNESCO Executive Council, and which second mission took place this year in Sipirma, Malabo. Thank you, distinguished President. The past and coming victories for the people of African descent should not be credited to them only. These victories are also those of Africa, of the African diaspora, and the entire family of nations. They are victories for all mankind. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Culture and Tourism of Equatorial Guinea for her statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Carmen Ineze Bakwizi, Vice Minister of Participation and the Equity of Colombia.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all of us who make up the great worldwide diaspora family as a result of the transatlantic slave trade are proud today. Today is a day to honor all the men, women, and children who crossed the Atlantic. It's a day to remember those who lived and also those who died in this economic enterprise that disgraced the entire human race. The International Decade for People of African Descent represents a historic event of special significance in the United Nations efforts to guarantee recognition, justice, and development of people of African descent. of those victimized human beings who survived the transatlantic slave trade and who have taught the Western world so much about dignity in the face of subordination, conquering by sheer hard work the right to a humanity denied, a new and vigorous concept of freedom, the legitimate use of resistance, and about reaffirming African cultural practices that allowed for the conservation of life descendants, hope and joy within the abominable institution that was slavery. Allow me to highlight some of the ideas that Colombia considers of the utmost importance for achieving the decade's action plan. As you know, Colombia is the third highest country of African descent in the Americas, behind Brazil and the United States of America. It's estimated that there are around 12 million people of African descent. Since Durban and its preparatory conferences, including the one carried out in Santiago of Chile in 2000, the people of African descent and the problems affecting them have achieved a place in some governmental agendas, especially thanks to the incorporation of an ethnic racial variable in national population censuses. And in Latin America, the labor has been carried out in 15 countries. These censuses have revealed the close ties between poverty and racism, as well as demonstrating that the majority of people of African descent suffer a lack of citizenship rights in economic, social, political, cultural, and symbolic terms, and therefore they do not participate effectively in the important decisions that affect them. With this in mind, Colombia will move ahead in formulating and implementing public policies that recognize the distinctive features and social problems for people of African descent, which requires the implementation with a differential approach of social, economic, health, and territorial public peace public policies, and in sectors and territories, especially the National Development Plan. With this goal of eradicating the earned dignity of black people to society as a whole, the recovery of their historic memory takes special importance, and we need widespread dissemination of support for the whole educational system. And we need the scientific group of UNESCO is involved in this also. We must eradicate racism and racial discrimination. For this reason, the government of Colombia, within the framework of the International Decade of People of African Descent, will hold on the 21st of May 2015 the Social Mobilization Education Day, which will include an online education course aimed at 1 million people, to include primary and secondary education students, teachers, and public officials. Also, next year, Colombia will hold a national survey on racism and racial discrimination. In addition, following the international experience, such as Earth Hour on the 21st of May 2015 at 12 noon, in all the public institutions, there will be a symbolic act against racism and all forms of racial discrimination. In May 2015, Colombia will stand up to racism against people of African descent. Mr. President, since the 1991 political constitution, which recognized Colombia as a plural, cultural, and pluriethnic nation, important legal frameworks have been created which grant people of African descent specific rights, both collective and individual. In 1993, the Law 70 of that year recognized property rights for black people over their ancestral territories and the right to preserve and conserve their cultural identity, the right to preferential utilization of natural resources within their territories, including the right to priority over mining resources, the right to autonomous development, and the right to participation. In 2011, my country adopted another law. This is of special benefit to the people of African descent. And in 2005, the law of equal opportunities for African Colombian people. Also, on behalf of my country, I would appeal to the organizations in the United Nations system and the World Bank team that in the context of the DECA, they include the differential approach with concerning people of African descent in all of their programs, and that there be an index of racial inequality to achieve the decade's goals. Achieving goals imposed by the DECA requires an urgent review of the standards that govern international cooperation, both for multilateral agencies and national bodies. As a middle-income country, Colombia, this leads to discontinuation of international cooperation, but this does not take into account the fact that in these countries there are millions of people which, as in the case of people of African descent, fall within economic and social conditions that still justify international cooperation. Mr. President, Colombia will present for consideration of the United Nations General Assembly as a midterm evaluation of the International Decade for People of African Descent in 2020, the 4th World Conference Against Racism and Racial Discrimination. Colombia offers to host this event. Colombia celebrates that the declaration arose from the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discriminations, with the active participation of the Colombian expert in that body, while also being one of the promoters of the decade. Let our ancestors lead the way and bring us the wisdom to unite reason and emotion so that in 10 years we may reach the highest standards of rights in terms of recognition, justice, and development for all people of African descent in the world. These lofty standards are now a universal, multiracial, multicultural, and irreversible goal. Thank you.
I thank the Vice Minister of Participation and Equity of Colombia for her statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia, who will speak on behalf of Group 77 and China.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Excellencies. I would like to